A streak of shimmering blue marks out the Lake Victoria on the horizon. It's a vast cavity of majestic beauty, sprawled out and brushing up against undisturbed hills. The fractal fingers of its shorelines shelter the bays and the inlets, and small islands dot the open waters. This was the cradle of aquatic civilization dating back thousands of years, and their descendants still populate the lake shores, trying to make a livelihood as their ancestors did. But much has changed. The Lake Victoria was once a source of purity and life for the teeming hundreds who depended on it. But so it was in those days, years ago, until a blight crept up on the waters. Now the lake is a receptacle of filth. We're here to investigate the crisis lurking in the deep, just how sullied, despite appearance, the water is, and the human cost of that contamination. With the help of scientists from the University of Nairobi's Department of Public Health and Toxicology, and collecting samples from the lake shores in Muhuru Bay to Jinja, where the Nile begins its journey to the Mediterranean Sea, we set out to find out how man's poison has weakened the pulse of East Africa's blue heart. At every first light, a flock of birds swoop into the shallows on the lake's shorelines in search of breakfast, fishing for scraps while fending off competition. It's nature's cruel metaphor for a community's uneasy dance with fate. Local fishermen like Michael Otieno have a harder time finding anything at all.
Hapo mbeleni tulikuwa iko na mapato, kwa maana tulikuwa tunaweka nyavu karibu, lakini tunapata samaki wengi tunauza hapa. Sasa inalazima sisi tuchukue boat tuende mbali kabisa, ndio tuende tupate hiyo maji safi, ndio tuweke nyavu zetu. Hapo ndio tuanze kupata samaki. Tunaenda vitu kama 3 hours ndio tufike mahali kuna neti. Unajua tuna time na upepo pia. Upepo kianza kuvuma mapema, sasa tuendi huko, tunawacha.
The degraded quality of the lake's waters has made it that much harder for fish to breed. Now the talk of fishermen who ply the inshore bays is scarcity.
Sasa hiyo nikienda kutafuta kazi ya kuanza inabidi niende huko. Nikwenda kupata hata kidogo hata 3 hivi. Unajua hiyo 3 sasa nyingine ni moja. Kama hapa tunauza mbuta kwa kilo moja shilingi 300. Unajua sasa ni samaki 3. Ambayo ni mbuta sana hii kilo 6. Sasa nikipiga na hiyo pesa hii pa hivi. Niende na hii. Unaona sasa hii inabidi lazima tutumie samaki net mingi sana kutoka hapa hadi huko ndio tupate hata samaki hiyo 3 kilo 50, kilo 20 nitegemea na upepo, lakini kwa nyavu kidogo. Na sasa hii ndio tunatumia nyavu mingi sana. Sasa hii ikipaka mingi sana 15.
And as such, the crumbling trappings of a way of life lie in plain sight. The most cherished fish, the tastiest, and the most valuable have disappeared.
My name is Tom Guda. Tom Guda is the National Chairman for Beach Management Units in Kenya. It is not good enough now that the lake is very dirty and the shoreline is also very muddy. So fish like tilapia cannot find room to breed because they need shallow, sandy, sheltered bays to breed. So with that, without breeding, then no restocking. So less fish, less fish. So what we have now in the Gulf is kamongo, the lungfish. So when you find kamongo, the lungfish, like what I've told you, you only find it where it is dirty. Now we have lost labeuningo. We have lost fuane. Those are the local names for them. We have lost mbiru. We have lost so much species of fish. In fact, if you asked the people that used to fish before we came, they will tell you they have lost over 20 species of fish.
The Kenya Marine and Fisheries Research Institute has been studying the lake. The problems anchored in the water and their effect on the lake's fish stocks.
I'm Christopher Aura, Assistant Director Freshwater Systems Research, and also the Center Director, Kenya Marine and Fisheries Research Institute, Kisumu. Now, as ChemFree, we undertake research involving water and the fauna. The health of the lake, as I would say, it's in a deteriorating state. And of course, from a layman point of view, you can look at the water transparent, the way the water is looking. From the water color will tell you what is the status of the lake at that point. Yes. In the years 2000, we used to have about 2,000 tons of fish, or it was in the neighborhood of 169,000 tons. But we have had a 28% decline of fish catch. And right now, on average, we are having about 115,000 tons of fish.
Their research helps explain why the lake's native bounty, including the much sought-after tilapia, known locally as ngege, has been dying out, and how man's hand wrote their doom.
We are seeing more of tilapia being affected when we are talking about invasive species, water pollution, among others. And as you understand, tilapia is the most important, cherished delicacy because of its taste and because of just culture. What I may say more so, tilapia is affected than the rest of the fish species.
It's in part a fish-eat-fish story. The introduction of the exotic Nile perch, also known as mbuta, unexpectedly ravaged the schools of the indigenous fish. A voracious predator, it feeds on much smaller fish and has been blamed for tilapia's decline. But while the Nile perch may have only rendered the coup de grace, the lake is dying, and the humans, much more than the perch, are the villains. Here in the tropics, lakes are as imperiled as forests, and Lake Victoria is the one in deepest peril. Named after England's Queen Victoria, the view here is neither uplifting or imposing. Hints of its heydays now litter the shorelines, rusting boats wedged deep in the mud, the abandoned piers, the testaments of a bygone era. The beaches, once filled with visitors, are now deserted and withered wastelands. It's hard to imagine that before the age of modern progress, the community drank and lived off this poisonous cesspool. But this transformation from paradise to purgatory has unfolded before Patricia Odongo's very eyes.
Nakuja hapa 77. Napata kama maji iko kama maji ya friji. Na mchanga tu inaonekana mchanga safi. Na samaki inakuja paka nje. 77 ilikuwa samaki nyingi kabisa. Kwa maana maji ilikuwa safi. Na siku hizi hakuna samaki. Because of dirty of water. So wanawachaga tu nyavu iko ndani huko. Wanaweka saa 9 jioni. Wanarudia kuenda kuleta asubuhi. Alafu wanaweza kurudi hata na samaki 2, 3. Hakuna penye watasika. Kwa maana samaki hakuna. Chafu iko. Takataka yote kwa maji. Kringeti yote kwa maji.
Usoma Beach, where she holds out a living, sits on the margins of Kisumu, a city of about 750,000 people, according to the 2019 census. The lake is the soul of the city, providing water and food. But the city casts a large shadow over the lake and its future. The people have been sucking the life out of it.
This heritage that God gave us in terms of Lake Victoria, how are we looking after it? And to what extent can we safeguard it for the future? You remember the biblical story. The man who gave some of his servants different talents. We were given this lake, the second biggest freshwater lake in the world. And we are just not looking after it properly. When God comes and says, "Where is my lake?" we say, "Here it is."
Industrial pollution, untreated sewage, and the still widespread practice of open defecation have made this stretch of the lake a toxic soup, teeming with evil.
By the look of it, it looks like we have very high algae. It's known that green algae would actually be resulting from very high nitrogen levels and phosphorus, which essentially would be coming from organic waste. And organic waste, of course, would be generated from human activities as untreated sewer being discharged to the water bodies. So we will test the water for microbial contamination that, of course, will be coming from sewer, untreated sewer or directed discharge, and chemical waste that may be coming from industries.
We took samples on the lake along the industrial stretch that houses Equator Bottles, the franchised bottlers of COCA-COLA in Kisumu, to the Kenya Pipeline Company next to the ruins of the once vibrant Kisumu Beach Resort.
You see, if you look at this is what we are saying, that we have the green blue algae, right? The blue green algae is toxic. It's cyanobacteria. We pick the water and test it at that level. But we'll move a little bit deeper and pick the sediments. Now, sediments will help us to look at the over a longer time because it will accumulate. These chemicals will accumulate in the sediments. So when we take sediments, we're able to pick a better picture of what has been happening over time. We are also picking aquatic animals. And in fish, the most important thing we test are the chemicals, because fish are known to accumulate chemicals. And when we say this, we are thinking of things like mercury, things like cadmium, things like chromium. They are heavy metals and they may not be there. And a fish will not die when they consume that. And then now when humans feed on that, then that's where the problem comes in.
Well, a whole lot of problems is what River Kisat brings into the lake. Indeed, the river is troubled from source. A swamp east of Kisumu that has now been cleared to make way for maize and sorghum fields, to the mouth where it drains its grime into the lake. As it courses along through the Obunga slums, River Kisat drags along a concoction of filth. The slum lacks sanitation facilities. Here, the river mingles with the sewage from the settlements, and the end result is grimy and lethal.
If you don't have the basic requirements in excreta containment, and it is allowed to be discharged into the water bodies outside your house, at the end of the day, that is carried to a bigger stream somewhere and to a bigger river that ends up into the lake where we are getting our food from.
Further downstream, the river meets another slimy flow, an evil-looking black from the city's water treatment plant, run by the Kisumu Water and Sewerage Company, KEWASCO. There's been few improvements on the now 8,000 cubic meter capacity plant since the colonial days. Built in the 1950s, the Kisumu Water Treatment Plant serves most of Kisumu, taking in its filth, cleansing it, and releasing what it considers to be an untarnished stream back to the environment.
I'm very satisfied and confident that what we release back to the lake meets the regulatory standards. You've seen we have a very modern lab up there where whatever comes in, whatever goes out is taken to the lab, and we look at all the parameters. And I'll tell you that 99% of the times we normally meet the effluent standards that is released back to the lake. Our effluent actually dilutes the polluted river, so it makes it better.
From the look of it, of course, the water is colored. Of course, the brown is because of silting. Because of it rains, there's a lot of erosion that takes place. The brackish is, of course, from the treatment plant. And then, of course, you know, they're treating as sewage. We could pick the color, we could pick the smell. That's a level of contamination. And that is both from the company treatment discharge site and also another site in above the golf club. I think there is a discharge for our factories at that point, of course. And we could see the silting, the black silting, that would highly suggest chemical contamination.
The poisonous discharge from the plant calls into question its capacity to treat the city's filth or even the water it abstracts from the same foul lake to a level safe enough for domestic consumption.
I mean, these are the things that annoys me, you know, because KEWASCO is our company. And sitting on the board of KEWASCO is the Minister for Finance, the Minister for Water and Environment, and the city manager. And, but I guess that these individuals are so overwhelmed with so much work. And we actually need somebody who is not just a minister. We need people who know something scientifically about environment.
But KEWASCO says it's not the only one to blame for the toxic flow into the environment.
So it is at this plant where we receive both the domestic waste and industrial waste. As you know, industrial waste, we expect that it is pre-treated so that it meets certain standards, NEMA standards, before it's brought for us for further treatment. All the influent that comes, we actually take to the lab to measure those parameters, whether they meet the standards or not. And if they don't meet, we quickly talk to the industries to take corrective action. And of course, when you do that, we also liaise with the regulatory bodies. We liaise with NEMA, we liaise with the Water Resources Authority as well.
Secondary sedimentation, then this is our discharge effluent.
According to their analysis of the waste from industries for the period between the 17th of October 2018 and the 21st of October 2019, the waste from 4 industries ran afoul of NEMA's guidelines on discharge into public sewers, having failed some aspects of their physiochemical tests. This, they say, tested their capacity to effectively treat the waste.
Whatever's coming, in most of the times we are able to treat it, but it stresses our system. So we normally do frequent tests just to ensure that we get the quality of what comes in right. And if it is not right, then we ask the industries to take corrective action. If they don't, then we block their sewer system.
Equator Bottlers, the franchised bottlers of Coca-Cola in Kisumu, was one of those flagged. The company, however, says its waste treatment protocols are beyond reproach. In a statement, Coca-Cola says effluent is taken through various rigorous stages before discharge. The effluent is also tested regularly in their own labs and in other accredited labs externally to ensure it complies with both local and international standards. The bottler says they recently had discussions with Kiwasco, where they agreed on common sampling protocols on the effluent so as to come up with a consistent point of reference as well as take corrective actions when necessary. According to a report by the National Environment Management Authority for the month of December, a team of inspectors from the regulator, the Water Resources Authority, the Kenya Marine and Fisheries Research Institute and Kiwasco investigated allegations that the company was discharging effluent directly to the lake. The team concluded that the 2 pipes connected to the lake were only used to abstract water from the lake, one an old line and another currently in use. The team ordered the firm to decommission the old line to dispel any pollution concerns.
Doctor, what do you think about this?
Kiwasco also flagged the waste from the Kenya Breweries Limited. But the brewer discounts Kiwasco's assertions. KBL says none of what they submit to the city's treatment plant has been flagged since 2018. The brewer further says the Kisumu plant treats all its waste and ensures it meets the requirements for discharge into the sewer line, analyzing the effluent 4 times a day in their own lab, and takes corrective measures if the results vary from the accepted standards. Also of concern was the waste from the East Africa Seafood Limited, a company that processes Nile perch from the lake for export and imports tilapia and other fish from China, and Kibos Sugar. For Kibos Sugar and Allied Industries, their vision to be the home of simple sweetness and the reality seem to flow in different directions. Relations between the company and locals have simply soured over the future of River Kibos. Yet another stream that snakes past the industry on its way to the Lake Victoria. The river is a pool of dead water, emptiness and toxins, and locals say the industry is responsible.
Tumeshaongea na huyu muhindi kuhusu hii maji na aski. Uchafu inatoka hapa, huko nyuma na pale huko distillery. Watu wanasikia harufu mbaya sana. Uchafu Ani vitu zenye zinakuwa kama grease hivi, vitu mbaya mbaya, ma chemicals. Kwanza saa hizi hatukunywi hata hii maji. Tumbo iliniuma sana. Nikaenda OC wakanipata na typhoid. Sasa yenye wanamwaga hizo maji, hatuingii hata hapo kwa maji. Samaki pia kuna chemical ingine yenye hii nini inatoa, hii sugar inatoa. Wakimwaga maji, samaki yenye yuko hapo na kufa yote. Kama mvua imeanza, ndio wanaanzia hiyo kumwaga maji.
If going to the river, we must go undercover. This I took before going to court. This is the river. This is the factory.
At the outset, Benson Ambuti Adega cuts the image of a firebrand revolutionary. He is leading the crusade to save Kibos River from the alleged pollution by Kibos Sugar Company.
Are we going there? Unaza katwa.
At times, he claims, at great risk to his own life.
You can't use that water. That water is smelling. Can you even wash your hand with the smelling water? I was born in this area. We used to take that water directly from the river. We do grazing with the same water. Right now we can't use it. We depend on the pipe water, which sometimes it bursts. You can't access it. That is our life.
He and two others filed a civil suit at the Environment and Land Court in Kisumu against the Kibos Industries for failing to comply with NEMA regulations on effluent discharge, and against the National Environment Management Authority and the county government of Kisumu for failing to stop the company's operations.
They don't represent the community. We had been crying no one to come out. So I decided, as a man, with a single hand, I talked to my legal team. I talked to them, they are doing for me pro bono petition. This is a matter of life and death. If we can't protect our environment, we don't have future generation. And this is where the cancer is coming from. I think our people are seeing this thing. Cancer is all over. People are dying because of cancer. The cause is this pollution. We are not against any investor in our community. We are happy with the investment, but they have to follow the right procedure.
Kibos Sugar maintains its operating procedures are stainless.
Kibos is very careful when it comes to environmental management. Whatever waste we produce from one industry enters into the other industry as a raw material to add value. NEMA has given us 95 to 100% compliance. That is why we are still in operation. If indeed we were polluting, NEMA would not allow us to operate. Once or twice we have had an accident, which we reported to NEMA. We have a compliance plan, which we are working together with NEMA to ensure that nothing goes out, nothing that is going to be of negative impact to the environment.
That is the final product. Open the top.
In July of last year, the Environment Court handed the community what they saw as a sweet victory. The court ordered the company's closure. It also found that the sugar miller and two of its subsidiaries had obtained their licenses illegally. But Kibos moved to the Court of Appeal. A ruling by a 3-judge bench that was expected on the 19th of December was deferred after one of the judges, Professor Justice James Otieno Odek, was found dead in his Kisumu apartment on the 16th of December. The Court of Appeal on the 31st of January dismissed the decision of the High Court, saying there was no evidence that the firm was polluting the environment or that the residents had suffered any damages as a result of the pollution.
I'll deal with this thing to the end. Whether it will take my life, but I will save the life of our future generation. And I'll fight this war to the highest court in the land. So long as the Constitution is protecting me, I'm happy.
We welcome anybody who wants to see what we are doing. We welcome you to take samples. NEMA takes samples themselves.
We took samples of the effluent from the factory to find out for ourselves what is veiled in the troubled waters. The results were unsettling. But it's not just in Kajulu location where something pungent has been festering. Residents of Otonglo in Kisumu say the prison in their community has shackled them to years of torment. It's a confine they can't seem to break out of. The lines on Rasco Olilo's face are perhaps an impression of the very fine line between the hope and despair that the community now walks. Rasco Olilo remembers when the waters of the Saka stream winding past their homes was crystal. Now it's been sullied by a revolting discharge from the Kodiaga prison.
Hii mto naitwa Sakaler. Sakaler maana yake ati hii maji ilikuwa maji safi. Tumetumia hii mwaka nyingi sana. Mimi nimezaliwa nimepata hii maji. Tuko na shida kulingana na mambo ya prison. Na saa hii huwezi fanya nayo kazi kwa maana ni mafi kila wakati. Toka zamani sana hii maji ndio tulikuwa tunachota, tunaoga nayo nguo na safisha vyombo kwa nyumba, na sasa hii huwezi tumia. Sasa hii watu wako na cholera area hii. Sauri ya hii maji.
The prison sewer system is a crumbling colonial ruin set up in the 1950s. It was meant to serve the inmates, the prison staff and their families. Today, the sewer system is bursting at the seams, overburdened by the addition of the Kisumu Medium Security Prison and the Kisumu Women's Prison. In July of 2017, at least 34 inmates at the facility contracted cholera. In 2009, 30 inmates at the prison died of cholera. A prison being an inherently detested institution, pollution problems there are largely ignored. And the residents say so have their complaints.
Tumeza piga kilele mara nyingi sana. Tangu hii mafia yaanze kuingia hapa, watoto ambao imezaliwa hata wamekuwa wakubwa. Na tupate usaidizi. Niko na uchungu kwa maana hii maji hata ukileta ng'ombe hawezi kunywa. Akisikia harufu ya nini hiyo hawezi kunywa.
NEMA has also issued a closure notice to Maseno University in the interest of public health. The institution, which failed to comply with an earlier order, does not have a wastewater treatment system. Raw sewage from the university still flows openly into the environment. A notice to remove all illegal connections into River Kisat was also issued to Autotech Solutions Limited. All this slime that drains into the lake allows the toxic algae and other invasive plants to flourish, cutting off the oxygen supply for all other forms of life. And so this prized asset has been deteriorating, and its treasure trove of diversity is nearly gone. But it's not just in Kisumu where the seeds of filth have sprouted. Our investigations took us further up the lake's watershed to its life-giving veins that also carry some deadly contents. Recent rains have infused a fresh surge of life into the Yala River. Thousands of liters of fresh water now thunder across it on its journey from the highlands in the Mau forest and into the Lake Victoria. The storm-lashed waters bring essential nutrients hidden beneath to the banks, and there's a living to be made by those who can cope with the fast current. The banks of the Yala River are sparsely populated. The river does not flow through any urban or densely populated area. Perhaps that's why it's still as pristine. The same cannot be said of many of the other rivers that flow into the Lake Victoria. The River Migori is one of such several streams that connect this region to the lake. Its waters travel cold from the forests in Transmara, out over the flat plains, through Migori town and into the River Kuja as it carves its way into the heart of the Lake Victoria. The river courses past a sun-bleached collection of make-do tin shelters that dot the plains. Here, a community slowly poisons itself to earn a living. This is the Osiri Matanda gold mine near Kenya's border with Tanzania. There's no sparkle about this village, just the people scratching a living from the gold deposits underneath, and on a very small scale. An average miner gets around 2 grams a day on a good day. A gram of gold sells for about 3,800 shillings.
Hii sehemu yetu ni ina ukame. Sasa hii ndio tuseme yenyewe baraka ambayo Mungu alitupa. Kipato chetu inatoka upande wa dhahabu. Tunapata school fees yenyewe, yani mambo yote yenyewe, yani tuseme yenyewe, yani mahitaji yetu yote inatoka upande wa dhahabu.
The miners use mercury, an installed solution, to extract gold from the ore. But mercury is a type of deadly venom for the river that snakes past the village and all who live off it.
Since the time began, we were born here, and this is the source of water where those who dwell around, they fetch water from this river. Also, those who are doing farming, they do irrigation using this small generator to pump water to their shambas. Some 10 years back down the line, people used to fish in this river, but recently fish is no longer there. But if it is there, they are not quite a number. Could be, maybe the water is polluted, and that's why you not find maybe life inside the water that can accommodate fish.
The procedure looks simple enough. As the tumblers rattle and spin, the gold ore breaks down and the flecks of gold bind to the mercury.
So after this stage,
sasa hii ndio dhahabu, unaona hiyo? Hiyo yenye inabaki nyuma hiyo. Hiyo.
haijachomwa.
Hii sasa haijachomwa.
Mpaka ichomwe na moto, litani ile rangi yake unaijua ile.
The mixture of gold and mercury has to be put to the fire to extract the gold, releasing dangerous mercury gas into the environment. The run of poisonous waste also seeps into the ground, mixes with the treatment water and flows downstream, where it joins the river. High doses of mercury are a well-documented cause of birth defects, including crippling deformities and nervous and immune system disorders. The most notorious episode of mercury poisoning occurred in Japan in the 1950s, when a factory dumped the heavy metal into Minamata Bay. More than 2,000 people were poisoned by the bay's seafood. Some died, while dozens of children suffered severe birth defects. But mercury poisoning can be difficult to diagnose because it has many symptoms in common with other ailments, and in the absence of government warnings or controls on the use of mercury, it is easy for the miners to dismiss its effects.
County government has also sensitized people on the dangers which are caused by the mercury. And to the other miners who go down the shaft, they're using the helmet and also the hand gloves, also the gumboots, for them to protect their bodies when they work under the ground. The dangers of the mercury, people have not started realizing the signs and symptoms. They just hear that people say that there are some dangers of mercury.
Tangu nizaliwe mpaka nifike umri, sijaona mtu ambaye ameathirika juu ya mercury. Endapo kama kuna madhara, lakini hapa kwetu sijaona.
Some of the symptoms are not clear. The person could get health problems without knowing. Some of them will get them even before they are born, because when the mothers consume, pregnant women, when they consume those chemicals, that will damage the brain of even the baby before it's born.
The Nzoia River rises from the Cherangani Hills, providing a lifeline to more than 3 million people on its 257-kilometer journey to the Lake Victoria. It flows through the region's agricultural belt, where it waters the cotton, maize and sugarcane fields. Every year, the river pushes over its banks. The silt it leaves behind in the lowlands of Budalangi improves the area's agricultural production. But the river is now a victim of the very agricultural activities it has helped prosper, as it collects a number of toxicants, including pesticides, along its way. Around WEBUYE, the industrial center, the river absorbs effluent from the WEBUYE paper mill. The death of the paper plant in 2009 was seen as an environmental blessing. Residents often complained that the plant often belched acrid smoke into the air and pumped a noxious liquid into the ground below. A strong smell of sulfur was one of the town's defining features. Now the hums of the machines is back on, breathing new life into the town, but also into concerns about what eventually causes into their lifeblood. As it nears the mouth, it causes past an unkempt collection of temporary structures, a small offshore community that has made homes in the fast-flowing water. Hidden from the world, their lives are keyed with the river's natural rhythms. For the Sango people, the river is the principal highway, transporting goods and people to and from neighboring Uganda. They have forged such an intimate relationship with the water that they rarely leave it. But this community has no sanitation facilities. All their waste ends up in the river, which then winds through an amassment of reeds and weeds as it pumps its contents into the Lake Victoria. The Nyando River rises from the high rainfall areas of Nandi and Kericho. When it rains, it waters flood the plains. But residents of Muhoroni, in the river's middle reaches, say there's something more sinister in the water. 2 of Muhoroni's residents have moved to court to demand the closure of the agrochemicals and food company over a virulent discharge from the factory that poisons the River Nyando waters and the fish in it. They also want NEMA to cancel their discharge license for failing to meet the standards for discharge into sewers and rivers. The noxious mix flows further downstream through Ahero town, where it picks up the town's mark on the way to the lake. But first, it provides nourishment to the rice fields at the Ahero irrigation scheme, one of the biggest rice farming belts in the Nyanza region. The chemical fertilizers used in the acres of rice paddies drain back into the water, which mixes with the river as it flows downstream. To understand how all this has conspired to snuff the life out of the lake, we took samples at 28 different points around the lake's watershed, and after nearly 3 months of tests and analysis, the results are startling.
In all the areas that we sampled, over 20 places, there is no single place that we didn't identify a toxicant. In all the rivers, in all the various parts of the lake, at different depths, all the samples contains one or more of the toxicants that we are looking for. I can authoritatively say that based on what we found, the lake contains chemicals and bacteria and other disease-causing organisms which would be of very serious concern, considering the high increase in incidences of many diseases. Cancer today has become a very serious problem. People don't know where it is coming from. But as a toxicologist, I can say without doubt that some of these chemicals are responsible for the increase in those diseases.
There was a heavy presence of heavy metals such as mercury, lead, cadmium, chromium, zinc, iron, manganese, and fluoride occurring at different thresholds in the water, in the fish and sediment tested at different points. There's a high risk of exposure to mercury for frequent fish eaters, pregnant women, and developing children. Continued exposure to mercury has been known to cause leukemia, retardation, miscarriages, and stillbirths among women. It can also cause damage to the kidneys and to a body's immune system. Exposure to high levels of lead may slow down the mental, nervous system, and physical development in children. Even low-level lead exposure in developing babies has been found to affect behavior and intelligence. In adults, it affects the blood pressure, causes kidney damage, and can cause miscarriages and stillbirths in women and infertility in both men and women. Exposure to high levels of copper can also cause liver and kidney damage. Manganese affects the respiratory system, the brains and the nerves, and can cause forgetfulness. Cadmium is a silent killer that attacks the kidneys and other vital organs such as the heart if it accumulates in the body. It also causes the bones to become weaker. Zinc is a trace element that is essential for human health, but too much of it can damage the pancreas. Extensive exposure can cause respiratory disorders. Iron too is important for the body, but it causes a host of ills when it's out of balance. Excess iron is deposited in the liver, the heart, and the pancreas, causing damage to the organs. It can also cause liver cancer and diabetes. The samples of water, fish, and sediment collected at the mouth of River Awach had the highest number of these heavy metals and at levels way above the safety threshold. The samples were found to have high levels of mercury, lead, cadmium, chromium, and iron. The second most contaminated point was River Kisat, which also takes in what is meant to be treated effluent from the Kiwasco treatment plant. It was found to have mercury, lead, cadmium, chromium and iron at levels above the recommended safety threshold. River MIGORI was found to dump into the lake high levels of mercury that it collects from the gold mines, high levels of lead, cadmium and chromium.
If we did a survey on the diseases or the condition that these people are experiencing, like in that region, definitely you will find that the effects must have been taking place, and maybe there's nobody to tell them that this whatever you're experiencing is because of what you're exposing yourself to. Because we know you have mercury, you are vaporizing the mercury, and therefore you have mercury vapor directly going to your lungs. That's toxication direct, leave alone the one that now comes to the water bodies.
Samples from the effluent from the Kibos sugar factory were contaminated with lead and cadmium at levels way above the safety threshold. Samples of the discharge from the Kodiaga prison show they were also heavily contaminated with lead and cadmium. The effluent from the pan paper plant at WEBUYE was found to have lead at 0.09 milligrams per litre against a recommended standard of 0.01 milligrams per litre. It had copper at 0.45 milligrams per litre against a standard of 0.05 milligrams per litre. It also had zinc, iron, manganese and fluoride at levels higher than the safety standards. The samples from MARENGA beach in Port Victoria were highly contaminated with lead, copper, iron, manganese, zinc and fluoride. 25 different types of pesticides were detected in the water, the sediment and the fish at varying concentration and at different points. Some of these pesticides have been banned globally over their harmful effects on people, aquatic life and the environment, including DDT, one of the most powerful yet controversial poisons the world has ever known. Promoted as a wonder chemical in the control of malaria and other pests, DDT was banned for agricultural uses worldwide in 2001. It is highly soluble in water and has been known to affect reproduction in humans. It's also classified as a possible cause of cancer in humans. And the effluent from the Kodiaga prison and River Kisat had higher loads of it. Also detected in the samples was ENDOSULFAN, an insecticide and a known neurotoxin globally banned in 2012 and which causes birth defects, and Mirex, which also lingers in the environment and is a known possible cause of cancer.
DDT belongs to a group of chemicals that are known as organochlorines. They are highly persistent in the environment. They can stay for several years without being broken down. Exposure to DDT makes the body adapt such that the body will destroy any chemical, whether useful or not. That means you try to treat somebody with a drug, but because their liver is destroying it, they don't get healed.
The bacteria E. coli and other forms of fecal coliform were found at all 28 sampling points. They can cause waterborne bacterial infections and foodborne bacterial infections when contaminated fish is undercooked or consumed raw.
A lot of imbalances that happen within the water have a lot of effects, a lot of dynamics that we may not be able to essentially pin up to. But we know that different types of aquatic animals feed on different types of nutrients. And as I had said earlier on, the algae that we are seeing here at certain level is very useful for the animals, for the aquatic animals, because that's what they feed on. But when it reaches to a certain point and covers the water, then you don't have oxygen, particularly at night. That leads to death of a number of fish.
And with the spectacular decline of the lake's greatest gift, the Lake Victoria is now a textbook case of human-caused extinction. And the people of the lake who are riding the wave of plenty now face a similar fate as the fish. Nearshore fishing was good enough until the once crystal waters turned poisonous. Now fishermen have to set out into the open waters and with nets with progressively smaller mesh, hauling out younger fish that should be left to reproduce. Out in the open lake where the water is still cleaner, those who can keep fish in cages. For the farmers, these floating fish farms are netting them returns. But it's still hardly enough to satisfy the insatiable demand. The 2019 budget policy statement pegs local fish production at 180,000 tons a year against a demand of 500,000 tons. George Okeo is a cage fish farmer and a businessman who brings in fish imports.
Early 90s, I was in the university and I was born in fish, was bred in fish, and I used fish to sell to be able to pay for my fees. Fish used to be landed in our beach, over 1,000 tons, metric tons in a day. Now, you can hardly get 200 kgs of fish in a day. And this is a community that the only thing that they knew was about the fish itself. So there is no fish. That is the reality. There is no fish. In 1999, in Kisumu or around Lake Victoria, there were 9 fish factories that were processing Nile perch and exporting to Europe. From that time up to now, there is only 1 factory that is operating. Why? There is no fish.
Kenya recently turned to China to plug the deficit, and which remains Kenya's top source of fish imports. Frozen tilapia and mackerel make up 85% of these imports. In Kisumu, the subject of fish imports from China is a heated affair. Traders like Miriam Nyango complain that the cheap imports have driven away their customers.
Poverty imetuvamia. Sasa mtu akipata pesa yake kidogo, si anaenda kwa cheap. Na hii yetu tunauza 500 per kilogram. Sasa mtu akipata 500, si anaona tu aende kwa China yenye atanunua hata na 300.
Caroline Auma, another trader, shares her sentiments.
Kama China bado inakuja, itakuwa mbaya kabisa. Itakuwa mbaya. Unajua saizi hata watu hawajatrust samaki. Customers hawajui kama hii ni ya lake kama ni ya China, hawajui. Na unajua kitambo kulikuwa customer kikuja, hawezi akakuuliza hii ni yetu ama ni mgeni. Sasa lazima akutrust kabisa. Ikiendelea hivyo watu wataacha kula samaki juu. Kuna wakati yenye walisema hiyo samaki yenye inatoka China inaleta ugonjwa kama kansa. Sasa kuna mwenye anakubali.
In October 2018, President Kenyatta hinted at a ban on fish imports from China. China saw it as a trade war and threatened to reciprocate. The move to ban imports was also on the back of reports that the China fish was tainted with heavy metals. But after a month of a back and forth, Kenya seemingly resigned to the reality that there were fewer options. And so the China fish stays on Kenya's menu. In Kisumu, the fish from China is imported mainly by East Africa Seafoods Limited, operated by Alpha Group, and George Okeo's Migingo Fisheries.
I do farmed fish. I have a cage in the lake, but I also have imported fish. So it's a choice of the customer. There are customers who come to me and are ready to pay 800 shillings for the caged fish from the lake, but I can't produce enough for them. A middle class can go and afford fish for 800 Kenya shillings per kg. That lady who is in a slum in Kisumu needs to eat fish, and we are providing fish of 150 shillings per kg, for example. They can be able to afford because of the size, and they have to eat it nutritionally. It's good for them.
And as such, traders and individuals flock to his go-down in the mornings to buy cheaper fish from China. It is then transported to various parts of the country. Isa Juma says he's rushing to catch the transport to Mumias, where his family is waiting for the carton of frozen fish he just bought. A study done by the University of Nairobi in 2019 found that the fish imported from China had traces of mercury, lead, arsenic, and copper, even though the Kenya Bureau of Standards then denied that the fish posed any danger to human health. Migingo Fisheries also maintains that the fish they bring in is unsullied.
It comes with a quality certificate that it has been tested. And that is done by Kenya Bureau of Standards. Because what they do is they contract a local organization on the other side to do a test for them based on the standards. And this one is an international one, Bureau Veritas. So they cannot load any container to come here without that. When it reaches Mombasa, Kenya Bureau of Standards pick samples from when they are doing their verification. They pick samples of our fish and take to their lab and analyze. So we have never imported fish that, as far as we are concerned, that has heavy metals, that has any sort of contamination.
We did our own tests on the fish we had bought from the depot. The fish was highly contaminated with lead at 42.7 parts per million against a recommended threshold of 0.1 parts per million. It also had high levels of zinc, iron, and copper. It was also laced with a concoction of 7 highly poisonous pesticides, way above the maximum allowable limit.
It's purely bad manners in Lake Victoria for people to import tilapia. Why do people import tilapia? When we just do simple conservation measures and we get good, nice tilapia. And you know what happens with these imports from China. You have read a lot of stories about use of antibiotics and the environment under which that fish is reared. So we are going into problems because of our failure.
We are taking our responsibility by pointing out that, in our opinion as toxicologists, these chemicals are there. But now finding out who is the culprit in the contamination, I think that should be followed. There are policies to protect the environment. I think that is what has lapsed. What we can do is, first is to have behavior change, and the policies that are there, they need also to be revised and see whether are they serving us. Are they good policies? If they are good, are they being implemented? Who is responsible for implementing them? Are they sleeping on their jobs?
And a freshwater lake is much easier to clean of affluents if we are serious. I don't think the situation can be allowed to go on as it is today, because I think there's a very renewed vigor, both in the national government and the county government, in fact in the regional environment as a whole, to ensure that we don't let the lake decay.
But from the lake's gloomy shores, it's difficult to envision a rebirth anytime soon. The throng of birds that once enlivened the scenery have since moved on to more hospitable homes, and all that's left are scavengers foraging for scraps, as does the community. there are those who fear that the lake is too far gone and will never really be as it was. But nature can bounce back. Over the past 100,000 years, the lake has completely dried up at least 3 times.
There was a time when Lake Naivasha was also said that it's remaining with only like 40 years to disappear. And I think some efforts were made to improve that. So I don't know how long it will take Lake Victoria, but if we go that way, it can also disappear.
But so what if the lake was written off and left to die? For the fishermen plying its bays, the women selling fish scraps on the lake's beaches, and for the millions of people whose fate is tied to the lake, there will be nowhere to turn on their long voyage to oblivion. Sheila Sendeyo, NTV.
Ah